Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Talent Revolution, Tales from the Trenches. I'm Joe Shambaum.
And I'm Jill Caniglio Kirk. So, Joe, what is it that you want to chat about today? What's on your mind?
Yeah, I was thinking about this topic that is in every organization, small or large. It is the thing I would say that most talent acquisition, HR, and hiring managers necessarily don't love to do, but need to do. And I'm thinking of the job description. What are your thoughts?
Well, I guess I would agree that it's probably not the most exciting thing that a professional wants to sit down and do. But truthfully, when you think about it, it really does play an important role from the perspective of really lots of different angles that I can think of. One being attracting the right candidate, right? It kind of starts with how do you brand and how do you market the right people and represent, what the job's all about. So to me, and from that perspective, it really needs to be well written and, kind of some time and thought needs to be put in it. And truthfully, I'll admit it's something that I've definitely ignored and probably not paid enough attention to in the way of like doing a refresh, right? So I think it's a very relevant topic that definitely, some other people out there might benefit from as well.
Yeah, you know what? And if you take the recruiting talent acquisition side, and I'm speaking for myself, everyone, I don't need a job description, right? Like it's that intake strategy session with the hiring leader going, what do you need? What do you really want? What are those requirements? What's the role? Tell me about it. And those notes and those specifics is what we use, at least I do, to go find that talent, right? And go out there. Because most of my work is proactively going out there, finding different levels of talent. But I also have the other side of it is I need that as a tool, right? That tool of the job description, satisfies the candidate to understand what are we looking for. And it gives a little bit more sense of security that this is actually real. Here's a description instead of just trust me. And it's like you just mentioned, the marketing branding piece of the organization, it represents the organization of here's who we are, here's what's going on, and what we're looking for. So I hate saying the word, but I'm going to say it's the necessary evil in my side of things. And we need to spend enough time on it, but I also say we shouldn't be spending over indexing on a job description because, really we need to hone in on who is the person we're looking for, do they fit, and let's move through the process.
Yeah, one thing you brought up in the conversation that I think is important to focus on is really who are the stakeholders in the process, right? So clearly,
Who
TA,
owns it?
who owns it, right? I guess we share, in my mind, it's a shared responsibility between talent acquisition, between, human resources and the hiring manager, right? There's no way this process works without involvement of that hiring manager and having, their insight to make sure it accurately represents the skills needed, most importantly, but secondly, the real responsibilities of the role. And one thing that I've actually done before that I think has gleaned a lot of, tangible results is really taking some job descriptions and putting them in front of the working level employee saying, hey, take a look at this. Is this, what am I missing here? Right?
Yeah, is it real anymore? That's
Is
a good
this
point.
real? What's real, what's not real? And, I would just say that that's an experiment I've done myself that actually has led to some interesting findings where perhaps there's dimensions of the role that nobody's really like focusing on that could be really interesting to, use as a springboard to attract talent, et cetera. So anyway, I think it's important to, just highlight that it's a shared responsibility between all of those stakeholders. And again, the stakeholder you might not be thinking about is your own employees, right? So I think that's kind of a hidden gem, so to speak.
Person. Yeah, it's a fourth dynamic that I've never really thought of it that way, but you're right. It is would be a great program or project to go back to them afterwards and say, is this still real and relevant? And what are we missing? That's a cool piece. I like that. But if we go back to let's go back to the beginning, not the Stone Age, but the job description, right? I mean, a rec comes in or a hiring manager has a request, where do they start, right? The starting point of that. And I've seen it a lot of, hey, Joe, what do we have, right? Do we have an old one, right? Let me start somewhere. And depends on the size of your organization. There might be a bank, right? There might be a skill set, disciplined, repository of
Mhm.
all of that, right? Some organizations do. And a lot of the times is here's a really old one that I found, right? Some archived email set in some type of a SharePoint site. And then the other side of it is going out to the web and finding other competitors and looking at those job descriptions. And now, of course, I mean, if you're not using AI, let's use AI, right? And you can add a lot of context into that as a starting point. And I still believe it's the hiring manager's responsibility to do the initial piece of it. And then HR, and this is Joe's perspective, HR then needs to, let's call it HRize it, right? To make sure that it all fits and flows into it. And usually it depends on your size of an organization. There's a talent management organization that usually has that template that I've seen own it. And then it's our job on the recruiting side. Does it all make sense? Will this help attract and make sense to a candidate before it actually goes out and gets posted, right? I guess that's how I view it.
Yeah, I would say, in the old days, so to speak, a couple years ago, I was probably doing exactly what you're saying. I would kind of go to the repository, dust off the old job descriptions. I would go out to the market, look at perhaps like advertised jobs, to get a sense of, well, are other organizations labeling this the same way as me? Are there different things, maybe that they're highlighting that I'm not highlighting, and just get a sense of a pulse on the market, right? How do I compare? Maybe it gives me some ideas around, fresher ideas, right? Like I said, job titles is a big one because I think the wrong title can really, if it's dated, could really deter candidates from coming in. So I think you really can't minimize anything. But I would just say in the recent times, I do a combination of looking at, the job advertisements again for that benchmarking on the market and what people are branding things like, as well as AI. And I would just say I had an experiment myself walking into a new company in a new industry I wasn't familiar with, where I really kind of wanted to take the time to understand that industry and tried to build some job descriptions on my own after kind of researching some competitors. And then I basically also just opened AI, asked it some well-crafted questions. And I'll be honest, my lesson learned there was I wasted a lot of my time in doing what I did. Were there other things I took away from that research that I did? Sure. But at the end of the day, AI is a great resource for thinking about job descriptions. I think some things that you just really need to think about is what is your kind of format? You want to make sure that you understand what different elements are really important to you and what you're going to represent in that job description. But I think AI is a great shortcut, so to speak, and springboard for getting a good start on a refresh of your job descriptions.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. So I think you're talking about the format, which I mentioned earlier, talent management, but I also think there's a branding, marketing, communications aspect that has to go into that, right? Usually those opening paragraphs or the about us kind of sections that kind of get framed up from that communications marketing side of it.
Plus, just that summary of the job. How do you, in a nutshell, for someone that's going to only maybe spend 30 seconds reading something in an ad, try to encapsulate what that job is, right? So I feel like that piece is really important. And I think a lot of times we focus a lot on this laundry list and this very long list of things. But at the end of the day, I would argue that both the title and summary, when you're looking at new attraction of candidates, are probably where you should really spend a lot of time.
You're right. I mean, everyone's attention span's now less 20 to 30 seconds probably, right? Does it catch someone's eye? Does it make sense? And the second part that I wanted to expand on is the title. I mean, it's totally true, right? And so many companies call their roles something, but is that the industry norm? Is that going to attract somebody? And does it make sense to the world versus your internal? So internal titles, external titles, those all have to be careful, because I was at an organization where there was two different titles and they were flipped on the outside of the world, but we flipped them on the inside. So I had to look differently, and that was the complicated part of posting jobs, because it was going to attract the wrong person. So we had to work through those.
Just a clarifying question. When you say flip, do you mean like from a hierarchical perspective? Like, no,
it was the first
word and the second word?
No, it was actually the job. So there was a product manager and a product owner. And what we called a product owner was a product manager, and what we called a product owner was a product manager. So
I see.
going to the world, if I was looking for a product owner, they were technically product managers, or vice versa. I can't remember, but it was those
Yeah.
two titles
Okay.
were flipped. So we did it internally different than the actual market does. Now, who's right
Right.
and wrong? That's neat hearsay, but what I was looking for and then what was attracting. So I had to be careful that way.
Right.
And I think we ended up just posting them the opposite because I wasn't attracting the right folks. But then,
Right.
okay, proactively, I can go recruit something, but then I'm sending that job description to somebody and going, well, that's not who I am. I go, I understand, but read the details. That's what we call it internally. Right. So,
Yeah, getting that title right is important.
yep.
And I think you've just really kind of highlighted why it's important to do your homework and know what the rest of the market's doing.
Yeah, and then titles and levels is another conversation, and that's tough as well, right? If you're looking for, like, I've had some where we called them a manager, but they were really working level managers. So we really needed really in essence in the world is a senior person doing this things, but we're calling them a manager. So again, you're attracting potentially the wrong folks. Again, that's the TA's job to come in and say, how are we going to do this, everyone? Like this, here's the potential obstacles. How do we overcome them? And that's just with titles and with, like you said, the attraction of the words that come into that job description. So thinking through it, we kind of started ducktailing into what's the meat and potatoes behind the job description. I think the summary, so yeah, the company overview, but I think the summary is huge. Like you said, we got 20, 30 seconds to really attract the right person. The requirements, right? What are you requiring? Now, the problem is everyone's going to apply for jobs even though they don't meet the requirements. And that's kind of a whole nother topic we need to talk about another session, Jill. But, really it's those responsibilities, right? What am I going to be doing day to day? What am I responsible for? How does this going to work? And what are you expecting of me is a big piece.
Right.
Well, I think on the
qualification side, just to jump in there, I think my suggested structure there to avoid perhaps getting the wrong candidate is like must-haves, right? And be really clear with your must-haves are, and then your kind of nice-to-haves, right? I think if you could break it down in that way, you should be able to let the candidate know, like, don't apply if you don't even check these few boxes, because these are gates to being qualified, being considered as a candidate. And then kind of the nice to haves might be the industry experience, right? Or whatever those things are, certifications perhaps, right? Things that you would value but not disqualify a candidate for.
Right. And if the TA folks are out there listening, try to program and utilize your ATS to have those must-haves and get them as knockout questions inside of that or criteria. That'll save, this whole serial applying situation right now, that will potentially save and knock down some of those unqualified requirements that you're looking for. Right. So it's just an aside. But I think the new thing now is working conditions and environment is huge, right? Is it on-site? Is it remote? Is it hybrid? Sure. What does that entail? I think that's huge.
Right.
Salary. I was probably against this at the start, but disclosing the salary range isn't a bad idea. Does it make sense? And then you're saving time, right? If somebody's willing to be considered in that range, and I know some candidates might stretch it, but I love the full disclosure nowadays on that side of it.
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree. I think all of those things really help give the candidate the overlay of what's expected, right? When we look at the attraction side, and probably those things are most beneficial from that perspective, right? Maybe not as important internally, once the candidate's already on board. But one thing I also think that organizations miss, specifically hiring managers don't think about as much, and maybe HR people do and talent acquisition people do, is really looking at your skills and competencies and making sure that you're focused on both the technical, and hard skills, but that you're equally representing what soft skills are needed, right? And I think that's your opportunity to really talk about, hey, this is what it's like to work here, right? We're a collaborative environment. You talk about things like adaptability. If you're a company that's going through quick cycles and you're in a startup and you're pivoting all the time, it's really important that to not miss those soft skills, because I would just say that almost always, in my experience, the two biggest fails in hiring are the soft skills and the culture piece.
Sure.
It's really rarely the case that a person comes in and claims they can do a certain level of task and have a certain competency that they really don't know how to do. I'm sure there's people out there that say, oh, yeah, that happened to me. But I would just say that rarely happened to me in my career. But the fails have always been on the soft skills and more of the culture piece. So I would just say don't forget about those things, because they are important.
So the only thing I would say to add in there is putting those competencies and skills or disciplines, as long as it's not the same for every job, right?
Sure.
Each job is unique, right? You do need, I mean, there's going to be overlap in different things, but
Right.
as long as it evolves and change else, then it's just a static thing and it's like a
Right.
check the box, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
you
if
should
it's-
have your top three or 3 to 5, right? I mean, if it's the same for everyone and if it's a list of 10, then you've just kind of, you've just lost, right?
Right. But then, so we're adding all these things together, and then and you start, and I've seen these job descriptions. Next thing you know, it's 5 pages long. So it's a balancing act, because the other thing I was going to add is I see a lot of job descriptions out there, including benefits, right? Showcasing, and some of them are awesome to include, right? Because there's some newer benefits, and if you're trying to attract, and there's a different culture aspect to it all, including the new ones, take your pet to work, or pet insurance, or there's some, especially if you're in California, of the lunches and or other cultures and organizations
Sure.
across the globe. There's some standards that aren't typical within other ones. I love it. Put it in there, because those are some other extra sells. But just to put stuff in there to be able to try to make it look beautiful and add all these things, it bogs down a huge description. And next thing you know, especially with people looking at jobs on their phones now, you're just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and then people are just going to go, well, how do I apply? Right. So
Right.
there is no perfect measurement into that piece, but there's a balance, right? And you don't want it short, but you don't want it a novel long, is my point.
Yeah. And, my advice there would be to keep those things out of your database, out of your company archived job descriptions, perhaps, right? Because those things change from time to time. But you really need to ensure that you have that well represented when you're doing your kind of advertising and recruiting.
So in your experience, Jill, any other fails or other watchouts in your mind on job descriptions that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I would just say things to me that you want to avoid are jargon, right? Things that are maybe intercompany speak. I think a lot of people who have been in certain companies know what I'm talking about. And there's so many acronyms, right? And there's just words that are maybe overused inside that company. But I would just say be thoughtful about that. Things that you might, kind of use internally, but may not be viewed externally the same way. And then another big one I would just say is try to take a step back and make sure there's no bias and you're not, kind of targeting male versus female candidates. And I know there are a lot of resources out there to help with this. And people are saying like, oh, I don't understand. Like, I'm not saying he, him. That's not really what I'm talking about. It's a choice of words, the choice of verbs you're using really could create a bias in the type of candidate you're attracting. So have you had any experience with that, Joe?
Yeah, actually, so there was a tool I used, which was Textio. And again, I'm not being, subsidized by Textio. It was a good tool. You upload the job description and you're able to then, we set a score at the one organization I was at to look at it to ensure we were more gender neutral across all job descriptions. So every job description had to go through that, get a specific score. And the tool was cool because it gave you suggestions and then to make sure that it also flowed and makes sense when you are changing those things. And some things you just couldn't change, right? And you could spend, the average time I was doing that was, maybe 5 minutes extra to kind of run the job description through, make some changes. There was some times it went really long. And I can tell you there was a couple of them that I just couldn't change enough of it to get to a specific score. And as long as you're doing your due diligence to get to that.
Right.
Now, hopefully it did, increase the candidate flow. I don't have any specific data on that side of things and if it did or didn't, but we do a good consciously. All of our job descriptions went through that system and got a specific score to be able to at least be as gender neutral as possible. And we were able to use it for emails and other types of communication as well.
Sure.
It wasn't just for job descriptions. And that's just one of them. I know there's others out there.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's
sure we
go
can do
ahead.
stuff with AI now too, right?
That's where I was
again,
going.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Of
I
course.
think AI is your friend. You could always test it, right? And maybe a friend has access to one of these other tools and do a, kind of ask the same questions of both and see what you can glean out of AI. But my guess is you can get pretty far with, not really spending any money. So
True. Yeah. And that's the fun part of AI, right? And again, every company's going to have their own cadence and plan behind that, if you're going to pay for something or not. But, it can be helpful into those things. And the other watchouts that I would have, I mean, you're right on the jargon and the specific languages. I just want to be careful on the length that we have on these, right? I mean, the candidates want to be able to have this. I want it to be this is a huge representation of the company. So it needs to look right. And I'm going to go into format. Make sure it's formatted properly, right? All the bullets are the same. All the paragraphs line up, because it's like your resume. It's a reflection of yourself. It's a reflection of the company. So I'm a stickler on those little things, because you don't want that coming back. It's like, hey, look at this. This is what they sent me. This is the document, right? So if you're PDFing it, which is I suggest, make sure it looks right? Take that extra second and drive through that. And same with the website, right? If it's off, if the fonts are different or the different pieces, again, it's a quick little thing, but it does help with that presentation.
yeah, and I would say while you want to be short, you also want to be consistent. So I know a lot of large organizations have, fragmented HR teams working in perhaps different parts of the business and silos, but I think it's really important to make sure that as you're branding your company out there and you're posting jobs and you're creating job descriptions, you have a common format and structure.
Yes.
And you have the same key elements, maybe job title, summary, key responsibilities, what qualifications and requirements, right? Working conditions, comp and benefits, but make sure they're all the same. Don't, do one part of the business where you have 10 and one part of the business where you have 3. That's just not what you want to do in representing, a consistent brand out there. So
there was the other thought is the levels, right? So do we really change job descriptions by the level of the role? And I've seen it specifically where we get into some management or director level plus roles where it adds in those managerial characteristics, or maybe there's some specific stakeholder actions that go into that level of roles. I think, again, goes back to your consistency. If you're doing it for that level, then you do it for the same thing for those. And unfortunately, I think there is a different level of expectation for job descriptions when you get into those executive ranks, right? They're looking for, what am I doing? What's the impact that I'm making? What do you really need from me in this role and my impact and my responsibility across the organization? So I would say it's still a format, but the format may change as you grow in levels of the company.
yeah, I would say that's fair. And you definitely want to represent what leadership responsibilities there are, what leadership skills are necessary, and make sure those things aren't missed and they're in focus.
Absolutely. And if you're recruiting, and others, I'm sure have recruited other executives, they really do look for that job description even more than some of the just professional level roles, right? They want to understand, what do you actually really want instead of a conversation. They do want that on paper to be able to then line up expectations and responsibilities behind it.
Yeah. One other thing I would just say as a note is, while this branding piece is important, you really have to make sure it represents reality. So if you're in a company that's very hierarchical and very kind of top down, and you're writing something that sounds great, but it doesn't really represent the climate of the business, I hope no one out there is doing that. But I would just say you really have to, try to find that strike that balance, because, I know I can share a story, right, where I have a colleague of mine who was excited about a new opportunity, saw this job description, right? Applied for this job. I looked at the job description with her and, was really excited about, what it represented in the way of the culture of this company. And then, as she got into the role, she started understanding, that's really not exactly the way things work there, right? And it seemed like more of an inbox outbox type role versus what they described. So, you want to be really careful about embellishing job descriptions to make them sound cool to attract people.
Right.
You have to attract the right person that's going to fit that climate, right?
Yeah, and the job description is the first part if you're trying to change that culture then too, right? And that's trying to showcase it. But be honest, right? You should be able to be honest through the whole interview process, right, and understand this is a transition. We're trying to get to here, which is what
we're looking for a change agent to help us lead the charge and take it from here to there, right? So
yeah, but I mean, there are some job descriptions I've seen that are fun and we do these things and we do all that stuff. And then if it comes to reality that never happens, well, you can only ask so many questions during an interview to be able to truly get to that culture until you're living and breathing it. Right. It's that document that really represents the organization.
Yeah, and it could also be that they're highlighting the duties that are kind of cool and sexy, and they're kind of omitting that, oh, by the way, you also have responsibility as an HR manager for safety and payroll, but we didn't mention that in the job description, which is a big deal. Right. So again, I think it's basic, but we want to make sure that we're touching on all of the things, maybe even the things that may not be viewed as attractive by potential candidates.
Have you had anyone or in your organizations or even friends where they've had to sign the job description?
Actually, yes, I have. And I would just say that I think it's not uncommon in smaller companies, right? And I would just say I've also worked with legal counsel who has advised including the key responsibilities as part of the offer process. So.
Oh. Wow, that's even interesting. Because I've seen some where it's like you're coming in and it's part of your orientation and saying, hey, this was the job description, right? Now you need to sign off on it, right? Basically saying these are the duties that you're going to perform within the organization.
I've seen it go a step further as far as being part of the offer. But of course, just for all of you out there thinking about it, you want to make sure you have that little caveat that we can change this at any time, blah, 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 right? You want to have your legal T's crossed and I's dotted there and make sure
other
you
duties
don't
as a sign.
Yeah, because as we know, things evolve, things change, right? But so just a little warning there.
I did the project. It didn't go far there, and I've seen it come into another one on job descriptions where we were trying to do a video job description. Right. And actually, so it's a couple things. We try to embed a video, which is more about a culture, the organization inside the job description.
Okay. Like a link where people can watch a video.
It was actually on there and it auto played as you kind of went and looked at the job online. So we did that once as another fancy, creative solution for a job description. And then another one is where it wasn't the full job description, but it was more of a marketing plan for leaders or that hiring manager to actually do a video, and we would post it on like LinkedIn and say, this is what I'm looking for. Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm looking for this. If that's you, come join me, right? And do that 30-second, 20-second commercial.
I've also I really like, and I think it's really more about kind of the employee value proposition piece and how a company builds their brand and helps kind of represent what their people do, is really getting their employees to have testimonials, so to speak, or like what a day in the life is like, right? And I think having things like that on your corporate website, if you're doing a lot of hiring of software engineers, having a software engineer talk about what they do, what problems they're solving every day, right, really goes a long way in painting a picture for other people in that profession as to, are they excited or not excited about that role? So
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
those
a
are
good
awesome
opportunity.
links on your website, right? With your job description, you want to know more, or here's employee testimonials. I think those are great things to add because then they can click on it if they want to learn more, or they can just
Hmm.
apply to that job, right? So,
Right.
but you're right. I mean, that employee branding and testimonials and, the day in the life are huge pieces, right? And I've used those for more the next steps afterwards, right? Like I
Sure.
phone screen the candidate, moving them through the interview process. Hey, here's some good tips, right? About learn more about us as through the process. But it also helps on the initial piece to be able to track them with the job description. So,
Right. Yeah, I think we got a little off topic there for a second, but I do want to highlight one other thing that I have really relied on before in my career. And I think it's worth mentioning. If you really take the job description and you really focus on the skills part of it, and create a skills matrix, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to really work with your L&D teams and your talent management organizations, really about how you take a step back and, maybe like removing the titles. What are the overlaps between different roles and different job families that could potentially open our minds to different career paths for employees inside the company? So I would just say it goes beyond attraction, it goes beyond branding the company and hiring, right? I think there's so many more uses to job descriptions if we really, take a step back and think about how we could use them to really, enrich in, the whole employee journey.
well, and that way, I mean, glad you brought that up because then that is also for internal recruitment, right? Think about
Sure.
it, right? What is that skill matrix of the new opening? Who has the majority of those skills? What could be learned, or what's the extra training that is needed to be able to then bring them in? Or, like you said, have that talent discussion and, are you looking for here's options with your skills, here it goes, and that job description
Right.
is the key, which then plays into all the other avenues of it. So
Right.
huge
And
piece.
I would just say if you're taking a step back on your job descriptions, make sure that you're thinking about building those skills matrices and job architecture and all these other things that are really pieces of this important puzzle.
Absolutely. And then hopefully you have a system that can also house and manage that if you have the right HCM and ATS and different things connected, of course. But
Well, and the truth
um,
is, if you don't, I will just tell you that Excel is a powerful tool. Power BI is
absolutely.
an extremely powerful tool. And if you're lucky enough to work with technical people like I do and build relationships for fun, I have lunched off many engineers in my career to help me build what I need to be effective in my job without buying tools. So I would just say be creative, right? You probably have the know-how somewhere in your organization. If it's in your finance organization, right, your engineering organization.
That's a great way to have a stretch assignment or some other offset for someone to be able to do. So great
Or,
piece.
isn't it intern season too, Joe? It's intern
Yeah, that's
season.
true.
So,
Yeah. It's a great intern project. You're right on that
yeah.
aspect. The last to wrap it up on job descriptions, I think you've got to do what's best for you and your company, right? I say the core is a consistent outline, a consistent messaging that's true and honest, as much detail as you can. Um, Joe's take is don't spend hours upon hours doing it, but make sure that it's consistent and right for who you and what you are to be able to then drive through, because it is a piece of material that's showcasing you and your company for that opportunity out there. Jill, any other summary that you have?
What I would say is, I think this is one of these projects that's a great blitz exercise, right? Maybe get the whole HR team together, have a divide and conquer approach to it, because I feel like once you kind of get in the groove, you tend to tend to get momentum going. And then the other thing I would just say is don't minimize. What other opportunities there are to involve employees, et cetera, right? Just to get a fresh perspective. Because like I said, that's something I've personally done. And the takeaways for me were, pretty surprising and definitely enriched the whole process. So that would be one piece of advice I have for people. And, maybe a pragmatic way that they could step away from today and feel like they're, one step ahead.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear from you. So if you guys have comments, please put them in there. Share your experiences around job descriptions, and we would love to hear from them. And we'll respond as soon as possible. And again, if you've liked what you've heard and watched, please like and share and subscribe to the Talent Revolution podcast. But for today, Jill, I think we're done, and we want to wish everyone.
I would just say, we started thinking this was going to be so exciting, but there was a lot more to talk about than I thought. So I hope everyone else felt the same about it, Joe.
Absolutely. I think it was enriching, it was enlightening, and I think there's some cool ideas and topics that people hopefully will take away and see if it makes sense for them.
Right. Until next time, everybody. Goodbye.
Have a great one.